Hi, Liesel. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you on. Liesel is going to be one of our speakers at the Culture Impact Lab this year. Liesel, you're actually going to be closing out day one, I believe. And the reason for that is because your work really centers in around. I know this can be kind of a buzzword. We talk about empathy a lot. However, there is research, science backing as to why empathy is so important in uh, relational situations, meaning like humans being together, but also when we talk about work in the workplace, which is really just a gathering of humans working towards a common mission, how important relation and empathy is in that context. So please tell us who you are, give us an introduction, and then we'll talk more.
Thank you for having me. My name is Liesel Mertes. I live in the greater Indianapolis area. When I am not doing the work that I love paddleboarding. I have a really good gluten-free bread recipe,
Ooh.
and I like hiking quite a bit. I have 5 children, 4 of whom are living. My oldest is 18, down to my youngest, who's 11. So there's a lot of busy days in our household. I can be found throughout the spring on the side of many lacrosse fields or rowing regattas. And as to the work that I get to do, I am a workplace empathy consultant, keynote speaker, corporate trainer. I love talking about empathy and human centric skills as just that. So often we think of them as personality traits that some people have, some people don't. So we just kind of have to deal with the fact that John in sales is awful with people, but his numbers are good.
Always
And
John in sales. It's
it's
always
always John in sales. Although I would say it's not gendered. There are some women who really can drop the ball in these moments. And yes, there's definitely a personality impact. There are people who are more comfortable by base nature. But when we talk about them as skills that really affect both our people and our bottom line, then you can get more buy-in. And I love those moments, as you said at the start, the aha moments where people are like, oh, like it's not just this amorphous thing. Like, here are some tangible actions I can take that will make me better.
Yeah, and I always think about empathy in two ways when it comes to the workplace. So you and I are
Yeah.
both, we we work on the idea of empathy. I think relationally, but mainly within organizations,
Hmm.
within workplaces. That's kind of our sweet spot. And oftentimes, I think about it in two different places. One is the individual interactions, right? So
Hmm.
my leader, my team, like how does empathy show up in that context? And that's behavioral. That's like when I get my Sunday scaries, which I hope people don't actually get Sunday scaries when I'm thinking about Monday, like am I going into interactions every day that are empathetic and I know I'm going to be understood and seen and heard and
Yeah.
valued or not? But also is the value of the organization centered around humans and people and empathy? So I always have to remind people there's the two things can be true,
Mhm.
right? One is I can have a really great leader who could be empathetic to me, but is
Mm.
bumping up against this system that is not. And what I find is oftentimes leaders at that middle management level get burnt out because
Yeah.
they're trying to bring forward these values that we know are important in the workplace, but the system isn't quite supporting it. So tell me a little bit more about
Mm.
like some of the work you do in those two areas.
Yeah. Well, I would love to acknowledge also
Mhm.
that I talk about democratizing the skill set of empathy in individual leaders. That's that first level you were talking about. And I'll reference specifically some of what I do with them. But you're right, because at the executive level of leadership, it's very rare that any aspect of their job description involves caring for the well being of that middle management, senior VP, depending on where we go. It tends to be like the one or two HR and people who have to do it, which they are way under resourced for that level. So it is a matrix for burnout when it comes to organizational empathy. Some listeners, they might understand that immediately. Other people might be like, what does that even look like?
Yeah.
And a half step to the side, there's
Mm,
actually an area of organizational development where we have made empathy a science and knocked it out of the park. And
mhm,
that is in marketing. If you think about marketing, marketing is, I went, the business school I went to, IU, the Kelly School of Business, I didn't study marketing as my primary area of focus, but they are a marketing school. We're going
mm,
to go deeply into the nuances of how to, introduce the newest SKU of green tea toothpaste to a small demographic of the Chinese market within 100 miles, and the study and what the packaging is and how, like, there's actually an area of business that is finely attuned to the human experience, because we see it with a direct tie to our profit margin. And the reality is, for our internal stakeholders, for our customers, we just have to take that knowledge of, like, it is a good human movement. It actually, the data shows that it also positively affects your bottom line. And we're probably, 75 years behind what the marketers have done when it comes to, developing that infrastructure for the employee experience. Who are your first customers? To answer your question, though, and at the risk of sounding like I'm just monologuing, one of the things that I really do at that manager level is introduce people first. What's the business case? I know that you will have to take this back and
mm,
sell it to other people on your team. You yourself will have to become personally convinced. I can think of a session I did for all of the accountants of the Department of Defense,
mm,
which are about as buttoned down as you would imagine. And it was really important to show, at the level of brain science, at the level of economic data, like, why does this matter? Why should you give attention to it, especially for these data driven people? So we spend some time establishing the use case. And then one of the things that I find is really sticky for people is I introduce them to these empathy avatars. It's the idea that we all have an empathy toolkit that we arrive with, whether you've paid any attention to it or not. You have the
mm,
tools you reach for anytime you're confronted with a disruptive life event. Let's look at your tools. Are they serving you? If they're not, what are better tools? And the way people encounter those tools is these avatars. So you might be a fix it Frank or Francine who's like, well, you should do this, or you should try this, or a commiserating Candace who's like, oh my gosh, that happened to my aunt last year. You hijack the story. Or a buck up Bobby or Barbara who's like, we just got to keep going. So there are about 8 or 9 of those. It gives some psychological safety too, where people can kind of externalize the behavior. This is
mm.
not who I am. This is what I'm living into. So
Yeah.
let me pause there.
Yeah, no, I love the idea of the avatar, and recognizing that it's also like, there's different ways to authentically apply the skill set of
Mm,
empathy in the context of our backgrounds
yeah,
and how we process, and manufacturing empathy is also, uh, it can happen, right? I think we
yeah,
talk a lot about it in organizations. We try to manufacture it and try to, one example is I've worked with a lot of organizations who are like, you are psychologically safe here. And they,
if you just say it enough, does it make it real?
they say it, and it's like, yes, and it is so. And it's like, but my daily interactions aren't, there's no
Right.
symbols or signals that tell me that in every day. So I do think there's this kind of, and we were talking about this earlier about like,
Mm,
we really need to get back to the basics. Like when we talk
yeah,
about empathy, or we're talking about like the human experience at work, we're talking about things like dignity,
right.
respect, hearing, seeing people, valuing them. That doesn't negate the fact that we have to be clear about our
Hmm.
expectations, and it's a partnership and a negotiation always. But
Yeah,
we're creating the safe space to be kind about it and to say,
right.
hey, things change on the daily. You're a human, I'm a human. Let's create that space of openness and also set expectations around performance. And we can do those two things together without
Right.
eliminating the humanity of somebody. And I think what's happening, and again, you and I talked about this a little bit before we
Mm,
pressed record, but I think we are losing the storyline a little bit when
mm,
it comes to empathy, especially in these times where the world is complex. and you have many different people with many different beliefs and value systems and backgrounds coming together. And the idea of like social issues being
Right.
prominent within the workplace, I think leaders are kind of like almost crumbling underneath themselves because they're like, this is too complex, can't compute. Now,
Right.
like their brains are almost malfunctioning and they're defaulting to survival mode. And so I know I just blabbed on for a good few seconds there, but
Mhm.
tell me about how this translates to like meeting the moment today. What are some of the
Yeah.
nuances that we're seeing when it comes to empathy or human-centered leadership?
Yeah. Even as I talk about the potential of the world of work, it's it's not it's not a clean division or a binary like our outside of work selves and our at work
Mhm.
selves. It's all interwoven together. How is it helpful? I wish I had completely figured out the playbook that I could sell and transform in a 3-hour workshop because I'd be selling it all across the US and beyond. Um, but can we do better in our spheres of influence? Can the world of work, which will not save us, but is a microcosm with some structure that people don't always feel in their personal lives? Because it's not only the news cycle, everything is more expensive. There are people coming to work whose partner has been laid off, whose child has the disruptive diagnosis, who just got their own disturbing scan back. We have a massive demographic shift with the baby boomers getting ready to retire out. May they stay in good health for a very long time, but the numbers just show that we're going to have a lot more people who are in middle life who, in the next 10 years, are going to be fielding the calls about their sick parent or about their sick child. And these are actually linchpin moments in the workplace. I would say, especially when I speak at conferences, 1 out of every 3 people that comes up to me says, if my last manager, if my last job, if they had only heard or believed or had the baseline skills, I loved that job. I would still be there. Um, so people leave at those moments. It's also reasons why people stay. I mean, we have a friend right now. She is a judge and her son has just had this incredibly complicated month of medical diagnoses, and what she said, my work has been amazing. They have been so helpful. They've been like, she will remember that whether she chooses to leave down the line, she'll recommend them forever. And the intention that we can bring to be like, these moments matter, how they address our wider societal moment. This sounds so basic, but it is the number one stickiest tool that I use with clients across industries that people say that they are deploying, that they're using, that is making a difference. I talk about the stoplight check in. At the beginning of your meetings, and you should be having meetings where you check in with your people, just ask them to gauge the energy that they're bringing to that meeting. Red is I'm here, but it's really hard. Yellow, I'm here, but there are some things humming in the background. Green, I'm good, I'm ready to go. This gets you better information at the top of a meeting. Maybe you don't ask someone who is red to jump in right away. You give them a little space. It also clarifies we want to read into a situation. If someone's quiet, if they're pitched back, you think like, do they hate me? Are they unprepared? It gives you some context. There might be other things going on. It cues up meaningful follow up. If someone says they're yellow or red after the meeting, you can ask, is there anything we need to talk about? Any way I can support you? If they're green, you can celebrate that. You want to be a place that, knows the whole person and is able to have that. It's also a great way to introduce some more human centric stuff because sometimes people hear and they're like the whole person. Okay, and they're like, I don't know, we just talk about tasks and to-dos. I don't even know where to start. And you can start and be like, I'm yellow right now, my boys' lacrosse season is starting up and my daughter's too, and there are so many things on the calendar, and I'm just reckoning with losing most of my evenings. And what that invites other people to do is like, we can talk about that. It's some shared experience. You can't ever demand that people share more of their life, but you can make the space so that in those meetings, if they have something hard, they can share. How does that help our current moment? I think that we change and our hearts grow bigger towards people when we can see our shared experience, when we can see the human dynamic, when it's not just, oh my gosh, you're the guy that posts that way or has that thing on their desk, or you're the person with that sticker and I don't know anything about you. Um, it creates more of a foundation where something better can grow.
Yeah, I've been looking into this idea of neighborism and
Yeah.
neighborliness, and because it's kind of been my way of um, managing the dissonance of the paradox that I'm living in. Many of us
Mm,
are living in right now, where there's so much happening in the world. And for people who are justice focused or values focused or integrity
yeah.
focused, we want to fix everything. We want to, that's
Yeah.
wrong. We got to fix it. And these are really big issues. And we also just live in a neighborhood
Right.
where, or we work in an organization, or we go to a church, or we have a family unit that we can influence, and it's our little sphere
Hmm.
of influence. And so I've been really, to your point, to continue your point, how do we just focus on the individuals?
Right.
I mean, obviously, there's systematic and systemic things we need to, a lot of our work is focused on, but also
Yeah.
our day to day. How can we be of service and, hear people out and see them for
Right.
everything they are? I have a really interesting example, and I don't know if it's quite relevant, but it really hit me as like
Mm.
a moment of humanity that is
Mm.
so tiny, but it had such an impact on me, and it kind of took all of what you just said into consideration. So
Mm.
usually when we all use like ride share apps these days, right?
Yeah.
We get into an Uber, and usually you get into an Uber in the back seat, and the person in front of you, you see the back of their head, right? And usually, sometimes they'll talk to you, sometimes they won't, but you're kind of, it's almost this invisible role where
Yeah.
you're seeing this person is providing a service to you. So you're getting in the back seat. All right, this person's getting me from point A to point B. I've always felt like that moment is kind of like when you like don't get to know somebody, right? And
Mm.
like the humanity is kind of stripped from them in that moment, and that person is just providing you a service. The other day, I got into an Uber, and my Uber driver turned around, looked me in the eye, and said, "Hey, how are you?" And that like moment was
Mm.
it left such a mark on me, because I'm like, oh my gosh, this person, not that I didn't think the person was a human before, but like that moment of relational
Mm.
connection, just turning around, taking the opportunity to turn around, look me in the eye and say, hey, how are you,
Yeah.
is huge. And it's the same thing in organizations. Like, we're moving so fast, right? So when you become either the person in the back seat, and everyone else is that Uber driver with their head
Right.
turned, and you don't really see the humanity of that person. You see them as like a widget or a
Yes.
step in your day. Versus, like, can you take a moment to check in, to look someone in
Right.
the eye through a screen or in person and say, hey, how are you really? Or create
Yeah.
the space. And so that was just like a tiny, tiny little moment
Right.
that like connected the dots for me with what you were saying around how we need those moments
Mm.
of empathy and
Yeah. Well,
space to provide that.
and implicit in what you're saying in the discussion is what gets in the way of those moments. Now, it's not like there was some like past time where everything was great and people did this perfectly. Although people had less distractions, the two things that will get in the way in our current moment is a drive for efficiency and your own exhaustion. Um, I teach workplace empathy. I book plane tickets, I stand on stages, I am deeply convinced and convicted that I cannot with integrity do that work if I am not doing the work in my own life to show up to people that matter. Like if I am when my own friends are having babies or getting sick, be like, I'm too busy to make a meal. I'm too busy writing the session or traveling to the place to give them a call or text them or send it, I'm doing the work. We have to be the work. And, are you someone who, it doesn't have to look just the way I do it, but when I hear that my daughter's lacrosse coach who I love and we're in community with, his dad has died. Like that needs to make it onto my to-do list to send him a card, to be there. Does it directly affect my QuickBooks invoices for this month? No, it does not. Is it still deeply important, to be able to be there? And what will get in the way is you will be busy with other things that you think are more important or that you feel more comfortable and competent in doing, or you will be exhausted. And that's the other part of it. Sometimes I'm working with hospitals or foster care or people where a lot more of the work is this deep attunement, and they're like, I'm tired. Like, I'm really tired. And that work is also, how do you have your personal practices of rest and refreshment that allow you to keep being that person? I was doing a session, and again, it was statewide youth services. And there was this woman who's like, you know what I do every weekend? She was like, I delete my email app off my phone. And it was like a collective gasp. People were like, what? And she's like, oh, don't worry. It'll all be right there on Monday. But she's like, I know, like, I can't do it. I just get it off my phone. And you know what? No one has really suffered yet to this point. But whether it's sleep or even just knowing what self-nurture looks like. I have a beautiful path along a creek in my backyard. The days that I make the time, it's about 15 minutes to the end and back, to walk that path to, after I've had a client session or something, and just kind of work that energy out, I am much better. The days that I don't, I know it in my body. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is, you mentioned this term earlier, but tending to yourself. It's
Yeah.
using those same empathy skills towards yourself. And
Right.
we are not, we don't have infinite energy and infinite
No.
time. And so I've struggled with this a little bit too, is
Mm.
that paradox of, to be in community, you have to be in community, right? You have to like
Right.
participate. You can't just say I'm in
Yeah.
community. You have to participate in community.
The
And
same way you can't just say, we grant you psychological safety.
you can't just make it so. And in a
Yeah.
world where it's kind of like, I don't know, there's something sexy about now
Mm.
being in community, and everyone
Mm-hmm.
wants to do community and be in
Yeah.
community, and nobody wants to contribute. Nobody wants to create infrastructure.
Right.
Nobody wants to put resources towards it. It's just like this cute like thing
Yeah.
that makes people feel good, and it's like, no, it's really hard,
Mm.
and it's a choice you make, and it's
Mm.
something you put resources towards, and it's generative. That's the whole
Right.
point of it. Also, you have to know yourself, and
Yeah.
I've struggled with holding those two things to be true, which is, I want to be of help and of service, and I only have so much to give.
Mm.
So how do you create that empathy to hold those two things to be true? So that's hard, just from a leadership
Yeah.
perspective, from an individual perspective. To your point, how do you tend to yourself?
So 2026, we're recording now, end of first quarter.
Mhm.
What are some practices or invitations that you're feeling as you live in that tension, to be sustainable? May we all make it to 2027.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I think I would love to hear your tactics too. I think this is a great way
Mm.
to kind of end the podcast, which is, yeah, what are some things that we can do individually
Mm.
to tend to ourselves so we can tend to
Mm.
others. I think one thing for me is recognizing that it is cumulative.
Mm.
So you don't have to do it yourself. You don't have to be the sole person to do it. One of my greatest skill sets that I'm recognizing is I gather people and I
Mm.
mobilize people. And that could be the Culture Impact Lab, which we're doing,
Yeah.
in May, but also like I have last year, I don't know if you resonate with this, but I have all these groups of women that I've
Mm.
met at different points of time
Yeah.
in my life. And they're all like little pods. They're like usually groups of
Mm-hmm.
three, and for some reason, like a group of three, like
Yeah.
I have these little pods from like grad school, or someone I met here,
Mm.
or and just I decided to get them all together, and I'm like, we
Mm.
need to be sharing resources, we need to be
Yeah.
helping each other from a relational perspective, but also a structural perspective. And I got them all together. And now there's this group chat, and we get together every month and we focus on something structurally that we're all thinking
Mm.
about. So, so the art of bringing people together, mobilizing them around something that I know other people
Mm.
are thinking about and they want to move on is my skill set. And so that's where
Yeah.
I get my most joy. And then when these groups come together, like you can just see the branches start to form, right? And you're like,
Mm.
oh, the genesis of that, the origin was me getting these people together in the same room or connecting them in a really intentional way. So I think it's just finding like where do you thrive the most, like
Yeah.
what produces the most energy for you, and rest. I mean, that's
Yes.
like there's some days where I'm just like I'm actually more introverted. People don't believe me when
Mm.
I tell them that, but I am. I
Yeah.
present really well as an extrovert because I'm like speaking like you on
Yeah.
stages and gathering people, but I need my time to recharge.
You're
And so I,
like a group of three
yes,
is my ideal.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The group of three is perfect. Like I'm stretching
Yes.
myself sometimes when I'm
Yeah.
in rooms
Mm.
and also the other piece is don't don't put yourself in rooms where you have to perform
Mm.
or you have
Yeah.
to prove. That's something I'm leaving in 2025 is this
Yeah.
idea that I need to be in rooms, and if I feel like I need to prove myself, I'm probably in the wrong room at this
Mm.
juncture. So
Yeah.
those are a few things. What about you?
I love all of those. Thank you for sharing them with me. Um, I have to tend my inputs. I um, I studied international relations and political science as an undergrad. I like the news. I like talking about it. And at a certain moment, I realize I have gone way too far. And I have, like, before I've even had breakfast, taken on like 20 different global issues into my spirit.
Yeah.
Um, I have to be disciplined with that. I have some practices about when I check apps, for how long, and just putting in different inputs. If I'm going to listen to a podcast, there's a category of like where I'm starting. Even intending my inputs. It was great. It was recommended by a New York Times columnist. It was like a fable for our times. And I read it, and it was a fable for our times. And it was really like dark and sad and ambiguous at the end. And I was like, I don't know if this is what I need right now. So, um, I am reading some Russian literature right now. I'm also back to some children's literature that people have loved, and it's just like there's a triumph of goodness and hope. So I'm reading Madeleine L'Engle's Space Trilogy. Quite, I don't know how many. I've never read it before, but my sister loves it. And just I find myself even just crying at the end of being like, this is just a triumph of walking into dark places armed nothing with nothing but just a goodness that goes before you. So I don't know how long I'll be in children's literature, but it's a good counterbalance right now. Being in my body and paying attention to my body. My husband has manufactured both a sauna and a custom cold plunge that he made out of a refrigerator chest, which is awesome. So
Wow.
he's very handy. So, there's something in like being in cold water, of being like, I can control my breathing. I can be at rest in complex situations.
Mm.
Getting outside, and also there are causes and things that trouble me as I read the news, and I've just really felt the invitation of like there are some great things going on that if you want to be a part of the solution, maybe some people are running for office, some people are writing the editorials. I've started volunteering. Our church has a great food pantry and free medical center, and there's something about being just the anonymous person among the other anonymous people, like packing the bags and doing the work. There's a phrase that has stood out to me, like, you're not called, I think Mother Teresa said it, you're not called to be successful, you're called to be faithful. And like, where are the places in my body and my own community where I can just be a faithful part of a solution that's going forward that
Mm.
matters at this time. um, and I'm trying to be more regular about having some friends over for dinner. Good food is a great place to gather around.
Yes.
So I like to cook. I've been experimenting with international cuisine. I've gotten good at some Ethiopian food. I
Mm.
roasted a leg of goat recently, so I'm leaning into some of that creativity.
Well, something that's a theme that I've also been looking into, and it gets into kind of what you just talked about, is
Mm,
I think we look to the workplace for community a lot,
mm,
and we've leaned on it too heavily.
yeah,
There's like, again, this is a paradox. Like, the workplace should be a source of community. We should structure it that way. And it's such a big part of our identity.
right.
So, how do we de emphasize it a little bit and think
Yeah,
about other ways that we are pouring into ourselves?
right.
Which I think none of the things you mentioned, as far as like, how are you,
Mm,
how are, and same for me,
yeah,
right? Nothing I mentioned was about work, it was about
yeah,
relationships, nurturing our bodies and our
right,
spirits. It was about family. It was about nature.
right,
How do we de-emphasize work so we can get back to other communal practices that
right.
regulate us and our bodies and our brains and make us even more honestly productive,
Yeah,
but it's in a smaller container.
right,
If that makes sense.
right. Well, I mean, we don't like it as much because it doesn't have an efficiency metric that's tied to it. And when you have been so shaped by a world that says what is most worthy of attention is what we can measure and pay you for,
Mhm.
it's hard to pivot out of that. But those things will last a lot longer than any wage work that I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Liesel, before we close out, if people are interested in working with you, they're listening to
Hmm.
this podcast and saying, oh my gosh, we need Liesel in our organization or
Hmm.
speaking to our audience, where can people find you?
Thank you for asking. My website is lieselmertes.com. That's lieselmertes.com. I'm also very active on LinkedIn. So reach out to me there. And yeah, I would love to have a conversation.
Wonderful. Yeah, we'll make sure all of that's in the show notes. People can easily
Thank you.
click on it and get in contact with you. Thank you so much for all you do. I thoroughly
Mm,
enjoyed this, and
I
I know
did
we could
too.
probably talk for another hour about
And
paleontology and anthropology.
and we're going to get to be together in May. And everyone who's listening, I mean, come. It's going to be great. The
I'm,
flowers will be blooming. It'll
hmm.
be wonderful.
I'm so excited. Thank
Yeah,
you so much for talking to us, spending the time.
absolutely.